Greetings. I'm out here car camping in Lake County, California, just driving around the county looking for a specific kind of wood, which is incense cedar. Haven't found any yet. We camped here last night in this area, and as you can see behind me, this area burned recently. I'm actually trying to figure out exactly when it burned by the plant regrowth, and it kind of looks like it burned last year, but the other thing that happens is if the fires are early enough in the season, the plants will start to grow back the first year, like through the fall, and then they'll continue the next year. So it's within a year or two that this burned. This whole area out here has had a lot of fires recently and two really bad fire years recently. So I think this was probably burned actually just last year. So I thought I'd walk around here and look at what's going on because we can see a lot about the ecology here and how it responds to fire and how everything's kind of pre-programmed and set up to deal with this situation. It's not like a fire is like this anomaly. It's actually kind of normal. And every so many years, these areas experience fires. The California Indians would burn on a regular basis as a management tool. Fire suppression can end up causing fuel buildup because the areas kind of are supposed to burn, and then when they do burn, they burn super hot. So we're just going to kind of walk around and look at the plants, and just I'll talk about any plants I see that are interesting, and maybe some other stuff about them, what they're used for and all that. Okay, so first off, you see these bushes here that were burned and died. There's a whole pile over here. So all those were killed. This is a species of plant that, unlike most plants, does not regrow from the roots when it's killed by fire. This is Manzanita. There are species of Manzanita that do grow back from the roots, but I think most of them probably don't. However, it has another survival strategy. If we look around on the ground here, there are Manzanita seedlings everywhere, hundreds of them. So all these little gray plants like these right here, those are all Manzanita seedlings. Now, these seedlings don't just sprout like this every year, or this entire place would be completely covered with Manzanita seedlings, right? They do this after fires. Now, I think what happens is that the seed coat gets damaged by the fire and then it opens and sprouts. So I'm pretty sure that's how it works. The seeds are extremely woody, like really, really hard, woody little rocks. You know, it takes something to get those seeds to actually sprout and grow. After the fire, even in areas like, you know, there was a grove of Manzanitas here, right? But even over in here, where, you know, there really weren't any actual Manzanita bushes, but the seeds have spread all over, you still get all these seedlings coming up once the fire burns through. So see, most of these trees are ponderosa pine. I think it's ponderosa. About, I'd say like 80–85% of the trees, the ponderosa trees, survived. But in a worse fire, or if there was a different collection of plants here and more stuff died, the Manzanita would be the thing that jumps back right away, fills in all the space, gets something growing on the ground, and kind of like heals and repairs and gets the cycle going again. And then what would happen is, say, like this area would turn into a big brush area of this like Manzanita brush. But when acorns and pine, you know, seeds and fir seeds and madrone berries and all this stuff fall into the Manzanita or drop by birds and squirrels and stuff, they sprout under the Manzanita, they grow through the Manzanita, and eventually they make a forest over the top of it, and then the Manzanita dies out. So it's like this kind of, you know, succession is the term that's usually used for that. So the Manzanita in this case is a colonizer species, and there's just like, you know, just dozens of them out here on the ground, again, in areas where there was no Manzanita brush before, but now these things are just sprouting everywhere. So there's some other stuff going on here. The most interesting is these little rose hips, and I don't think that this is probably a large species of wild rose. It's some kind of smallish species. But right away, these bounced back from the perennial roots. You know, they weren't killed. Like most plants that grow here are not killed by fire. The roots are not killed by the fire, or the plant doesn't die when the tops burn. And so these have already come back and produced a bunch of these great little rose hips, which I'm probably going to pick some of to dry for, you know, tea or something. The ferns, of course, the roots of those survive. Probably the worst hit trees are like this right here. That one dead center there is a black oak. And there's a lot of black oaks here, and a much higher percentage of the black oaks, and then this is Madrone. A higher percentage of those have died back to the roots, but as you can see, they're growing very vigorously from the bases here. And like I said, I'm still kind of trying to figure out if this is 1 year, 2 years, or maybe a year and a half of growth, something like that. But look at these shoots. So these are going to grow back very fast. All these shoots will compete. 1 or 2 or 3 end up surviving and becoming the new trees. And the same with the black oaks. And in this area, I've seen quite a few black oaks that had already been through this process, obviously. And, you know, there were several sprouts that had obviously come from back from a previous fire. So there's numerous small plants that have perennial roots that have come back. You know, the rose, here's some wild iris. We're probably going to collect a little bit of this to make string. This should be Brodea. It's like a lily family plant with a bulb, you know, like kind of a corm that comes back. I guess one of the main points I want to make is that, again, fire is normal here. These plants have adaptations, right? So the pines won't grow back. If they get killed, the tops get killed, they won't sucker, they won't sprout back. But they have resistance to fire. So a much higher percentage of the pines, again, like 80% or so, seem to have survived, and more of those are going to drop off. Like on this one here, I can see, you know, there's sap leaking all over the bark. The top is still alive, but my guess is that tree is not going to make it. But you know, that one probably will, and most of these probably will. So they have this thick bark, protects them. The other trees, like the black oaks and the madrones and a lot of the shrubs, have this ability to resprout and grow back rapidly. And the manzanita doesn't, but it has this huge capacity to produce seedlings, which there's just hundreds of. So everything's kind of, you know, adapted to recover pretty fast from this kind of incident. Another interesting thing is just how much ground cover there is already, because this would have all been burned up. All these needles would be completely gone and it would just be barren dirt. But look at the ground is already completely battered up. That's probably faster because most of the lower branches of all these trees have been killed. So they're dropping needles, you know, really fast and constantly. But it's interesting to note because the one thing you don't want is bare dirt. You know, bare dirt washes away. Keeps moisture in the ground and protects the seedlings, keeps the soil from eroding and just washing away. There's some warning signs up to be careful of flash floods after the fires, because ground just isn't as absorptive as it is when there's a good, you know, natural cover on it. Hugely beneficial that this ground could get covered so fast. Check this out, I just found this knife on the ground. It's a little, I call them box cutter knives. I am not a fan of pocket clip knives. I mean, I totally get it in domestic situations. You know, having basically a fancy box cutter is handy. You know, in terms of like what I think of as using a knife for, not a fan. This knife's ruined. I can't imagine that it survived this fire. You know, in the movies, you always see people, they do this all the time. They're heating their sword or their knife in the fire to get it red hot to like cauterize someone's wound, you know, or their own wound, or whatever. Don't ever do that, because steel loses its temper when it's heated. This knife would have to be deconstructed and the blade tempered and then put back together. Well, I'll take it home anyway. Who's over there? There it is. Oh, it's a ground squirrel, isn't it? Or is it a gray squirrel? Ground squirrel. This plant right here, if anyone's familiar, any primitive technology people out there, you know, Stone Age skills in North America are going to know dogbane, Apocynon cannabinum. This is another dogbane called mountain dogbane. I'm not sure what the species is. It has a milky white sap when you break it. It turns yellow in the fall. That's an easy way to spot it. The regular dogbane is one of the best cordage plants ever. It's awesome. I'm sure this has fiber, but the stems just don't grow big enough to actually use. Here's the seed pods right here, and both of those, of course, are related to milkweed, which is a great cordage plant. Ground squirrel. It looks like the ground squirrels are after these black oak acorns. So this black oak tree survived. It looks like it actually has acorns this year, but probably every one that hits the ground that's any good, you know, those guys are getting. And I think the main drop just hasn't happened yet. It's just, I think it's just starting to drop. First, the oak trees drop the wormy acorns, the bad acorns. Often if you pick up the cap and look at the cap, this cap's clean inside. But if the cap inside is kind of like dingy looking and dirty or brown or black or something, those are usually the rejects. So judging from this, unless a squirrel chewed this down or a bird knocked it down, the main drop has started. But again, everything that hits the ground, probably the squirrels are grabbing. Here's one right here. This is a buggy one. You see that damage on the side right here? And when I pull it out of the cup, you see the top's kind of moldy looking and messed up. So these are the damaged acorns that the tree's dropping. So maybe somewhere today I'll run into a good black oak tree. If you ask people who process acorns in California, if you ask like a survey of a bunch of them, most of them are probably going to say black oak is their favorite over any other native species. One that might be good. Yeah, nice big fat acorns.